I want to go back to David Cochrane now, who's got a bit of news. David.
Yeah, Rosie, I wish it was good news, but I don't know if this is a good news day. What I'm being told by sources who are aware of what was communicated to the Canadian government today from the United States, it wasn't just the tariffs, it wasn't just the ultimatum on fentanyl. There was also a warning that if Canada retaliates, the tariffs will increase. So there is a preemptive strike, or at least in terms of a message to the Canadian government, that if it retaliates with the targeted tariffs that it has been planning to, then the percentages will go up. This is something the president said. Remember when we were watching the video of him speaking in the Oval Office yesterday, he says the tariffs may go up, maybe not. He sort of floated it out there. Well, it's been communicated, I'm told, to the Canadian government that if there is a retaliation of any kind, then the U.S. will increase its trade action against this country. Now, that puts them in a very difficult position. I mean, what choice do you have but to retaliate? But you can see there the extent that the Trump administration, at least verbally, is willing to go to get whatever it is that it wants out of this. If it truly is just about fentanyl or the reshaping of North American manufacturing and trade arrangements and global trade in general, but certainly to hit your biggest customer and most reliable trading partner with a tariff like this over 19 kilograms of fentanyl as the stated reason, and threaten to go even higher should you try to defend yourself and pick up your own economy, is the situation that we're in. The Prime Minister is going to meet with the premiers at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, as you just said. The expectation is we may hear from the Prime Minister at around 6 p.m. Eastern Time. The expectations, though, keep sliding on things. We had been hearing 2 o'clock. We'd hear from the President on what they're doing. That's now sliding until later in the day. And of course, everything we are hearing and everything that has been communicated to Canada right now is just in verbal form. And they are not going to say anything publicly and officially until they see it in written form and with the legal weight of whatever action the president is taking behind it.
What is when you are faced with that kind of, I'm not even sure what to call it, I guess it's a threat. When you're faced with that kind of threat, what is the government thinking? Because the idea that we could not respond, I think, is unimaginable. Although you and I discussed whether it would be as huge as what the president is doing, but when you are faced with a threat of a counter to your counter, what is the thinking inside the government right now about that?
I don't know, to be honest with you, Rosie, and that they're kind of not really willing to engage in the thought process until they know for sure what's going on. But, you know, I think they'll get some clarity on the appetite of how to respond from the premiers when they meet with them at 4 o'clock. I think there is going to be an appetite by Canadians to have some sort of a response rather than just take it and lying down. But how far you go in terms of the damage you inflict on your own economy by retaliating to this, and then knowing that an act, because there's been such a lack of specifics and a lack of response from the federal government to this point. You know, the criticism is, why aren't you out there? Why aren't you standing up for Canada the way Doug Ford is doing and Daniel Smith is doing, depending on who you think is the right path? It's precisely because they didn't want to provoke something until they had to, right? And that there's by doing something, you know, for domestic political concerns and, you know, to satisfy the media cycle would antagonize the president or the people around him to you know, move the goalposts or raise the stakes yet again. So they've avoided it, and now you have to calibrate again with this threat that, like, this is a catastrophic assault on the Canadian economy with the threat to make it more so. And I just don't know if there's anything in the trade relations playbook that contemplates the President of the United States being this manifestly unreasonable and threatening to the Canadian economy. I mean, how do you prepare for something like this? So, you know, they've got their border plan. They've got, you know, people in the United States, you know, Susan Collins of Maine, Kevin Kramer of North Dakota, Rand Paul of Kentucky, you know, coming out against tariffs or speaking in favor of Canada's position that we're too dependent on each other and it'll hurt everybody and this is pointless, and saying don't do this. But, you know, if Donald Trump, who is at Mar-a-Lago today, is so intent on upending this trade relationship for this singular purpose of dealing with the fentanyl flows, and is willing to go even higher should Canada stand up for itself, it's an impossible situation for a prime minister and a government to be in, just given the competitive disadvantage you have as a country of 40 million people going up against the most powerful economy in the history of the world.
Okay, David, stay right there. I'm going to go back to Anis Sadari, who has some thoughts about the counter-tariff measures. Anis, if you want to weigh in there. David and I were talking earlier in conversations that I've had in government. You know, there is obviously a necessity to standing up to the United States, to pushing back in some way, but there is also deep concern of the impact of massive counter tariffs on Canadians and the Canadian economy. And so how do you balance those things in terms of the economic impact?
Well, that's really one of the troubles with counter tariffs. It's not just that is a political weapon that can be used against the United States. Counter tariffs would affect not just Canadian businesses, but Canadian consumers, and almost right away. Things like produce, furniture, electronics would all go up in price because those counter tariffs would be paid by the Canadian side. And to be honest with you, while a lot of what we send into the United States is critical to our economy, there are many individual American industries that will rely on selling to Canadians. But as a percentage of American trade, if Canadian counter tariffs are slapped, there are many aspects of the American economy that would, I don't want to say shrug it off, it would be hard for them, but the impact is not commensurate back and forth, and Canadian consumers would really feel counter tariffs. The idea that the Trump administration would threaten Canada with further U.S. tariffs if Canada imposes counter tariffs, the balance between the two isn't equal there in terms of dollar value, but it's really hard to say what else Canada could do other than trying to develop trade relationships elsewhere if it can't use counter tariffs as a retaliatory strike.
Okay, Anis, I will come back to you. I don't know if Katie Simpson is there. Yeah, okay, great. Katie, I don't know if you have information. I'll go over to you and then I'll get some of your thoughts about what we've been talking about here.
No, it's about the retaliation point. There was a moment yesterday in the White House briefing that was really telling, that actually, now that I think about it in context of that latest information that David has, it really stands out. So the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, she was asked by a reporter what Donald Trump's response was. Should Justin Trudeau go ahead with Canada's retaliation plan? It was specifically mentioned Justin Trudeau. And the way she responded was she described Justin Trudeau saying Canada would retaliate as an outrageous remark, saying that he should get on the phone with Donald Trump before pushing out outrageous remarks to the media. So now to hear that statement from that news conference at that time, and then you translate it to, okay, you're going to retaliate. Okay, then we're just going to put the tariffs up higher. It now points to that is the attitude coming from the White House in this moment. And it really sort of sets the tone here for just how sour this relationship is about to become. The Prime Minister's office has really tried to pride itself on trying to really do the deep outreach, along with the Canadian ambassador down here in the United States, Kirsten Hillman. They do deep, robust outreach to anyone and everyone within Donald Trump's orbit to really push Canada's case, because this is, of course, such a vital this is vital to Canada's economy. And we've talked about the consequences, what they could be and what it could look like come Tuesday. But the way that they have really tried to work to keep things polite, cordial, friendly, enthusiastic. And then to hear that tone from the White House press secretary, it really sets things on a different course now to hear as well that it's been expressed to them that if you retaliate, the tariffs go up.
Well, it also, I guess, Katie, I think a fair question to ask is whether anything the Canadian government has done has helped, whether it has mattered at all. I heard, when we heard from the three ministers yesterday, Minister Joly, McGuinty, and Miller, they made the point that they believed that their actions in the United States were not useless, that they were making inroads, trying to get people on board, that they believed that those messages would be passed on to the president, and yet here we are today with devastating news that could even get worse. So I do wonder how they're feeling today about the work that they've been doing over the past number of months to try and prevent this from happening, now hearing that it's going to happen on Tuesday and it's going to get worse if Canada ups the ante on our side.
You know what is one thing that stands out to me in this moment, Rosie, is when I talk to Canadian government sources, as well as when you listen to some of the things that Trump officials say publicly. We're going to start with the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He did an interview on a podcast on Thursday, and he didn't know, or he said publicly, listen, it's Donald Trump's decision. We don't know which way this is going to go. It's the president's decision to make on tariffs. That is what we've heard consistently from Canadian government sources. They make their argument. They lay out the case about how tariffs on Canada will hurt Americans. And it's so much sort of deferring to the president. They say the information is passing along, but really the decision stops at the president. And so this is something that Donald Trump wants to do. He actively campaigned on it during the election, and won during the election, again, describing himself as the tariff man, saying tariff is the most beautiful word in the world. But those around him who are hearing Canada's message, they don't even know themselves which way he's going to go. We now obviously have some clarity and some guidance with the information finally being passed on to the Canadian government. One thing that sort of has stood out about the last couple of weeks, ever since Donald Trump made that first threat back on the evening of November 25th, I believe it was 7:35 p.m., if I remember even exactly, which I think I do, when that came down, the way that the information has been communicated from the incoming Trump administration to the Canadian government, it's sort of been in bits and pieces. The Trump officials were afraid that if they officially talk with, outside governments or officially talk with Canadian officials, that, it could get in the way of their confirmation hearings, or it could sort of rub up against some rules that you shouldn't be doing. So Canada and the United States, the Canadian officials were doing more quiet outreach than they normally would, because they didn't want to offend the Americans. They didn't want to upset them, because they need to work with them to get to a solution. And in the lead up to, he said he was going to do it on his first day in office, on Inauguration Day. No one in the Trump administration or the incoming Trump administration had signaled to the Canadians that something was coming. Everyone learned about it from the Wall Street Journal to say, hey, you know what? Nothing today. It's going to be a memo instead to study trade practices. And that was still the case, even though that same night Trump floated the idea of 25% tariffs on Canada, the U.S., and the 10% tariffs on China. And so the new deadline was set. There was no communication until today. So, that has sort of been the nature of how this is going. No one around Trump knew definitively until we know in this moment it's officially been communicated.
Okay, Katie, thank you.